quite a severe head injury, but she was very much still alive on the back seat. And those people that caused the accident, instead of helping, were taking photographs of her dying on the back seat. And then those photographs made their way back to news desks in this country.
It was a night Clarence House would never forget, not because of a royal announcement or a glittering banquet, but because of smoke, real smoke, the kind that carried history in its ashes. Prince William was never meant to be there that evening, but what he walked into left even the most seasoned royal aides stunned in disbelief. Camilla, alone in a hidden room, was feeding Diana's belongings to the fire: a silk scarf, a handwritten letter, and something even darker, an unspoken battle over memory. What happened inside that room shook the royal household to its core. The corridors of Clarence House had always carried whispers of silence, the kind only deep secrets know. One hallway in particular, sealed for years beside the Queen Mother's old drawing room, was thought to be nothing more than storage, old furniture, maybe holiday decorations. But on that rainy Thursday, it became the centre of a storm no one saw coming. Oliver, a young assistant footman, was delivering a tray of Earl Grey to Camilla's quarters when a strange scent stopped him. Smoke, but not the comforting kind. This was sharper, laced with perfume and parchment. His curiosity pulled him further down the passage until he saw it, a door that had always been locked, now slightly ajar. From the crack, light flickered like candle flame, but the smell told another story. Fabric burning. Oliver froze, unsure whether to run or knock. At that very moment, Prince William stepped inside Clarence House unexpectedly, returning from an unannounced charity visit. He was meant to head back to Kensington Palace, but something pulled him toward Clarence House instead. The moment he stepped inside, Oliver rushed to him, pale, hesitant, whispering about the smoke, the open door, the strange flicker of light. William froze for a breath, then moved fast. That hallway wasn't random. That door had once led to a room filled with Diana's private belongings, sealed since the years after her passing, with only a handful of keys in existence. With every step, the scent grew stronger. The air turned heavy, almost choking. William pushed the door open, and what he saw stopped him cold. Camilla stood there, draped in a cashmere shawl, hair pinned neatly, holding tongs above an iron fire bin. Inside, silk photos curled into ash, and a leather-bound book sagged as flames ate through its spine. She didn't look startled. She looked caught. The silence between them roared louder than the fire. William's eyes scanned the scene. A torn photo of Diana and Harry discarded in the corner, scorched paper scattered across the floor, and on the tiles, a single sapphire earring glimmering defiantly against the smoke. This wasn't carelessness. This was deliberate. William's jaw tightened. He turned sharply toward the hallway, his voice low but unshakable. "Get the staff." The weight in his words made the walls tremble. From that moment, the story shifted. The fire, the fabric, the night William walked in. When he stepped fully into the dim glow of the room, time itself seemed to freeze. Embers snapped in the iron bin as Camilla's hand hovered above the flames, holding a folded blouse. Pale pink silk, unmistakably Diana's style from the 80s. William's stare locked on it, unblinking, as history itself threatened to vanish into smoke before his eyes. In that moment, it wasn't his stepmother standing in front of him. It was a stranger, someone who had crossed a line that could never be undone. Camilla parted her lips as if to explain, but the look in William's eyes froze her in place. When his voice finally came, it was calm, too calm. Each word cut through the smoke like a blade. "What are you doing?" Camilla straightened, as if to steady herself, and dropped the blouse into the fire. They both watched it shrivel and blacken. Then her words fell like stone. "Some things are better left in the past." Everyone should understand that sentence hit William harder than any shout. The past? For him, this wasn't the past. These were fragments of his mother, the last traces of her touch, her scent, her handwriting. And here was Camilla, deliberately feeding them to the flames. He stepped forward, his shoes brushing against a scorched scrap of paper. On the floor, half burned but still visible, lay a photograph he knew instantly. Diana at Balmoral, laughing with the wind in her hair, holding young Harry close. That very photo had once rested by her bed. William bent to pick it up, his hand trembling as he cradled its brittle edges. His voice came firm, unshaken. "I gave no permission for this. No one did." Camilla's eyes met his, and for a split second something shifted. Defiance lingered, but beneath it burned raw resentment. She had lived under Diana's shadow for decades, and tonight, maybe she thought she could finally torch it away, but she had miscalculated. She underestimated the unbreakable bond between Diana and her sons. Behind William, footsteps thundered down the corridor. One by one, royal aides and security appeared in the doorway, their faces morphing from confusion to shock. The air was thick, with smoke, betrayal, and history colliding in one suffocating moment. Elizabeth, a longtime staff member who had once served both Diana and Camilla, stepped into the doorway. Her eyes caught the iron bin, and she let out a faint gasp. Tears welled instantly. She knew exactly what was being destroyed. William didn't waste a second. He turned to the staff, his command sharp as glass. "Put out the fire." Then he faced Camilla, his tone colder than steel wrapped in velvet. "You will explain this, not to me." To him, the him was Charles. But even William knew no explanation could ever truly mend what had just happened. Some scars come from flames that devour memories you can never replace. When the fire was finally smothered, what remained inside that bin wasn't just ash. It was evidence. The scent of singed silk and scorched leather clung to the air. William stood rigid as aides carefully reached in with gloves, pulling fragments one by one. Each charred piece told a silent story. These weren't scraps. They were pieces of Diana's life, chosen with intent, now twisted into smoke-stained relics. Among the remains lay the fragile corner of a diary page, edges blackened, but words still visible. "I felt peace today." The aide holding it froze, recognizing the handwriting instantly. Diana's. William saw it too. The very journal he'd once watched his mother write in when he was a boy. To see it burned was like losing her voice all over again. Next came a ballet slipper, blackened at the toes, its ribbon melted into a warped shape. William knew it instantly, the same pair Diana had worn for a secret rehearsal before her surprise ballet performance for Charles. As a boy, William had replayed that ballet moment on tape countless times. To see its relics now, blackened and discarded, struck something deep and raw inside him, but nothing pierced him more than the discovery of a letter addressed to Harry. The envelope was singed, edges curled, yet still intact. With steady care, a staff member slid out the folded paper, only to reveal it half destroyed by fire. William read what remained, his heart tightening. "My darling boy. No matter where life takes you, never forget that kindness is stronger than status." And then it stopped. Diana's voice cut off mid-thought, stolen by flames. His jaw locked as he swallowed the grief rising in his chest. This wasn't carelessness. This was deliberate. Every item chosen wasn't junk or duplicates. They were originals, irreplaceable echoes of his mother's life. This felt less like burning objects and more like trying to erase memory itself. By now, Camilla had slipped from the room, leaving silence behind her. The staff moved like mourners at a wake, salvaging fragments with reverent hands, as if each charred scrap still carried Diana's presence. William turned toward a side table and found a wooden box. Inside lay treasures untouched by fire, a crescent moon brooch, a torn page from Diana's charity speech notes, and a single dried flower saved from her Kensington garden. He lifted the box gently, as though holding something sacred, and faced the staff. His voice was calm, but final. "Lock this room. From this moment on, no one enters unless I say so." They nodded without a word, their expressions heavy with understanding. What happened here wasn't just fire, it was betrayal. Betrayal of trust, of legacy, of sacred memory. The palace didn't echo with panic that night, it whispered. Word inside Clarence's house moved in silence, not shouts. It carried through glances, untouched cups of tea, and corridors that grew colder by the hour. After William sealed that door, the entire house seemed heavier, as if the walls themselves understood what had just been lost. These were not rattled servants dealing with gossip or tempers. This was grief. In the servants' hall, far from cameras and protocol, rank momentarily dissolved. Elizabeth, the senior dresser who once zipped Diana into gowns and brushed out her hair before Gallus, sat at the oak table, hands clasped tight. She hadn't spoken a single word since leaving the room. One by one, others joined her, sharing nothing more than heavy glances. At last, James, a younger valet, newer to the palace, broke the silence. Was it really her things? He asked quietly, eyes fixed on the table. Elizabeth's voice came rough but certain. It was hers, the perfume on that blouse. I'd know it anywhere. Penhaligon's Bluebell. She wore it every summer. Her voice cracked and she pressed a napkin against her eyes. Elsewhere in the estate, Thomas, a footman who had once carried tea to Diana while she wrote notes to her boys, paced the floor in torment. He remembered the warmth she showed him, the same warmth her sons adored, and now he couldn't shake the image of that warmth turned to smoke. His whisper to another aide cut like a blade. It wasn't just burning clothes. It was like watching someone rip pages out of history, like they wanted her erased. The younger staff sat frozen, confused. They didn't even know the full extent of what had been lost. The older staff didn't just remember Diana. They felt her presence still, as if she were the heartbeat of a gentler monarchy. Her belongings weren't objects. They were echoes of her soul. Every handwritten note, every worn ballet slipper, even a ribbon tied around an old bouquet carried emotion woven into it. And now, pieces of that heart had been fed to flames. Behind closed doors, whispers swirled. Some wondered if Camilla had been given quiet permission. Others insisted it had to be grief, not malice. But none of those excuses explained the secrecy, the locked door, the chosen relics, the fire. Later that night, the house steward gathered the shaken staff. His voice was firm but heavy. "You all know what this means. We saw too much tonight. Say nothing to the press. Say nothing outside these walls." From the back, Elizabeth's voice trembled yet carried power. "We were there for her when she lived. We will protect her in death." Heads nodded in silent agreement. That night, no one in Clarence House slept easily. Beneath the polished formality, something had shifted. The staff were no longer just workers. They were witnesses to a war, not about crowns or protocol, but about memory itself, about Diana's legacy. By dawn, the fire was gone, but the damage was only beginning. Clarence House was eerily still. William had not left the estate. He remained in his private study, staring through the window, a small box of recovered treasures clutched in his hands. He barely spoke, his silence louder than any order. Yet he had made one thing absolutely clear to his assistant. Camilla was not to leave the premises until he faced her directly. It didn't take long before she walked into the study. Shoulders squared, face unreadable, Camilla closed the door behind her with deliberate calm. William didn't turn to greet her. Her voice came first, steady but defensive. "I suppose you want an explanation?" He set the box of relics down on the table and finally turned. His eyes carried no anger. Something heavier stared back at her. Disappointment. Wounded disbelief. "I don't need an explanation," William said, his voice low. "I need an answer." Camilla folded her arms, bracing herself. "I didn't think it was worth keeping these things. They've sat in that room for decades. No one touches them. No one cares." William stepped closer, his tone sharp but quiet. "Because they were hers, because they are all we have left." Camilla's voice flickered with irritation. "You think I don't understand? I lived in her shadow for years, William. Every room I enter, she's still there. In the papers, in the public's memory, even in your father's silence." William didn't blink. His words cut straight through. "That shadow you resent is not a ghost. It's her legacy. And tonight, you tried to burn it." Camilla's lips parted, but before she could speak again, he cut her off, voice firm as stone. "This isn't about the past. This is about respect. You touched something sacred without permission. That room was sealed for a reason." For a moment, the silence pressed down like weight. Camilla's eyes searched his face, waiting for a softening, but it never came. William didn't yield. Not this time. Instead, he reached for a half-burned photograph, Diana at Balmoral, hair in the wind, laughter frozen in time. Holding it out toward Camilla, his voice broke like steel on glass. "I watched her cry in that dress. I watched her comfort people you and I will never meet. That's not just fabric. That's my mother's story, her presence, her life." Camilla's eyes flicked to the photo, then quickly away. She said nothing. "I don't care what the world says," William's voice cut through the silence. "Behind closed doors, I will protect what's mine, what was hers. If you ever try to take that from me again, there won't be another conversation like this." He didn't wait for her reply. William strode past her, opened the door, and walked into the corridor, leaving her frozen in place. Palace aides stepped aside without a word. His face told them everything. The confrontation was finished, but the fallout was only beginning. By the next afternoon, Buckingham Palace was on quiet alert. Staff sensed the tension radiating from Clarence House, but no one dared speak. Not officially, not yet. William had returned to Kensington, silent and unreadable. That silence thundered louder than any press statement. He carried himself like a man who had just drawn a line in stone. But the question lingered. Where was King Charles? While the fire and confrontation unfolded, he had been at Highgrove, attending a closed-door charity meeting. His aides insisted he knew nothing of the events shaking Clarence House. Yet by dawn, when he returned to London, William was already waiting. The meeting took place in the green drawing room. Father and son, no cameras, no witnesses. Less than 20 minutes behind closed doors, but it shifted everything in their fragile relationship. William laid it all out, detail by detail. The smoke, the fire, the half-burned letter, the destroyed photographs. Charles didn't answer right away. He sat staring at the carpet, fingers pressed beneath his chin, the weight of silence choking the air. "She burned Mum's things," William said finally, his voice stripped of anger, heavy with exhaustion. Not one or two, dozens, each one chosen. That wasn't clearing clutter, that was trying to erase her. William's voice was firm, cutting through the stillness. Charles finally looked up. For a long, heavy moment he said nothing. Then he exhaled slowly, sinking back into his chair. "Camilla didn't do this to hurt you," he said quietly. "You have to understand. She's carried a weight all these years." William blinked, stunned. "You think this was about her pain? Dad, I found her burning Mum's personal letters. Not old shoes, not scarves no one remembered. Letters to Harry, photos, a ballet slipper." Charles's face shifted, disturbed at last. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, leaning forward. "It was wrong," he admitted. "I won't defend that, but I also won't let this turn into a public war." William's reply came sharp. "That's not up to you anymore. You weren't there. I was." Charles rose slowly, signalling the conversation was ending. "I'll speak to her, privately." William gave a muted nod, but inside something fractured. His father's response was measured, diplomatic, coldly royal. Not once did Charles ask what was lost. Not once did he ask how William felt. That neglect cut deeper than the fire itself. As William stepped out, a footman overheard his final whisper to his father, "I'm not doing this again, Dad. Not like this." King Charles lingered at the window long after William was gone, his reflection staring back at him, lined with history, crowned with silence. Outside, the palace gates stood closed. Inside, the monarchy smouldered with a fire no water could put out. Not of flames, but of betrayal, denial, and wounds too deep to be healed by protocol. Diana's presence haunted those walls long before smoke filled them, and now, after the fire, after the confrontation, after the silence, it lingered stronger than ever. To the palace staff, Diana had never been just a princess. She was a pulse that ran through the halls. She spoke to butlers by name, asked junior maids about their families, even once helped a kitchen porter carry a box of dishes when his hand was injured. Memories like that don't vanish. They linger, like her perfume in the stairwells, long after she was gone. For the older staff, news of her belongings burned in secret cut deep. It wasn't about protocol. It was about pain. Those weren't just heirlooms. They were relics of kindness, laughter, and warmth that had softened the sharp edges of palace life. Diana had been a light in rooms that too often felt cold. Margaret, a retired housemaid who had served both the Queen Mother and Diana, was among the first to call the palace that morning. She had caught whispers from a colleague and asked the question directly. Was it really her things? Were the letters gone? The silence on the line told her everything. She hung up without another word, staring quietly out her kitchen window. She remembered the day Diana herself brought her tea after her husband's death, and the handwritten card that followed, with a pressed forget-me-not tucked inside. Inside Clarence House, the staff were still shaken. Elizabeth, the dresser who had seen the fire firsthand, asked to be reassigned. She told her supervisor bluntly that she could not serve someone who treated the past like rubbish. No reprimand came, just a solemn nod, followed by her file being moved quietly to a temporary reassignment in the laundry room. Agnes, who had once ironed Diana's gowns, stood over a blouse salvaged from the flames. The collar was charred, the embroidery ruined. Still, she pressed it carefully, as though willing the cloth to remember what it once had been. Not every staff member spoke openly about what happened, but their movements told the story. Meal prep grew quieter, footsteps slower. Laughter gone from the corridors. One footman refused to take Camilla's coat the next evening. Another lingered before opening a door. Small gestures, subtle acts of defiance. Not loud, but impossible to miss. Even Diana's portrait in the hallway near the Queen's Gallery seemed to draw more visitors than usual. Staff paused there, sometimes just for a breath. Some brushed a hand lightly against the frame, others whispered small prayers beneath their breath. It became an unspoken ritual, their way of saying, "We haven't forgotten." Because to them, Diana wasn't a memory to be edited. She was a chapter they had lived, one they cherished. And now, after someone tried to rip out those pages, they clung tighter than ever to what remained in their hearts: silent loyalty. A bond no fire could erase. But beneath the quiet grief, suspicion began to stir. Was this really just emotional frustration, or something far more deliberate? A hidden agenda? Inside those walls, the whispers took shape. Was this about power, about legacy, about control of the narrative itself? Camilla had always known she could never erase Diana from the public's heart. But maybe, just maybe, she believed she could reshape the way history remembered her. And that night's fire didn't feel impulsive anymore. The choices were too precise. These weren't random keepsakes tossed into flames. They were loaded. Personal letters, symbolic outfits, sentimental trinkets. Each item had weight. Each was one of a kind. Once those artifacts were gone, they would live only in memory. To some insiders, this wasn't about grief or resentment at all. It was about inheritance. Not of money, but of emotion, of legacy. Camilla was never just a stepmother or queen consort. To many, she was still the controversial outsider who had clawed her way into acceptance. And as the years passed, she carved out more space, not only in the palace, but in the history books themselves. Yet as long as Diana's belongings remained, so did the truth. A truth Camilla could never fully rewrite. Quietly, aides in the royal archives confirmed something chilling. Months earlier, Camilla had inquired about Diana's stored possessions. Which pieces had been reserved for the boys? Which items remained undocumented? At the time, it seemed like idle curiosity. Now, it looked like a blueprint, a prelude to fire. Lord Combe, a royal historian and longtime confidant of the late Queen, was said to have made a pointed remark over tea with a biographer that same week. History is always vulnerable to those who outlive it, especially when the objects are no longer there to defend themselves. In royal circles, history is currency. Photographs, handwritten notes, heirlooms. These aren't just keepsakes. They're anchors of reputation, proof of who mattered, who was loved, who truly shaped the crown. In that quiet war of remembrance, Diana's things weren't just burned. They were erased from the battlefield, tipping the balance of legacy. Camilla had risen from scandal to coronation, surviving years of venom from the press and strain within the family. But the ghost of Diana lingered everywhere, in William and Harry's eyes, in tributes from the public, in every mention of compassion tied to the monarchy. To truly cement herself, Camilla needed more than presence. She needed to stand uncontested, and perhaps that fire, silent, hidden from the world until William walked in, was her way of seizing control of a past she never owned. But Camilla miscalculated the cost. Because in burning what belonged to Diana, she hadn't just challenged a legacy, she had ignited a loyalty that even a queen could never extinguish. That loyalty was now rising, quiet but unshakable. Diana's room at Kensington was locked forever after the fire, but 2 days later, something no one expected happened. In the still hours of morning, long before tourists lined the gates or cameras flashed, Prince William arrived alone. No entourage, no warning. Just a dark coat, steady steps, and a single key in his hand. Security let him pass without question. Grief carried its own authority. He was headed to one place, his mother's private room, a space untouched for years, not frozen as a shrine, but preserved as a mark of respect. Everyone understood. Diana's room was to remain as she left it. A few trusted staff entered only for preservation, to dust or adjust the air, but the heart of it, the perfume bottles, the framed photos, the scattered charity notes, all stayed exactly as she had known them. William stopped at the door and stood there for a long, motionless moment. Then he turned the key. The metallic click echoed down the quiet corridor. Inside, the room breathed of her. A faint trace of lavender mingled with the must of old books. Curtains drawn let in a spill of soft light across the desk where Diana once penned letters to her sons. On the bed, The same embroidered cushion sat waiting, the one that had steadied her through nights of fear and worry. William didn't touch a thing. William stood in the centre of the room, breathing it in. The warmth, the echoes, the presence that lingered. But he hadn't come to reminisce. He opened the desk drawer, pulling out small boxes marked 88, 91, 96. Each one held fragments of Diana's life. He chose carefully. Letters, a cassette with her voice, a bracelet etched with his name. These weren't for display. They were for protection. He sealed them into a container, locked it, and handed it to a trusted aide. "Store it in the royal vault," he said. "Not under her name, under mine." Then, to the head steward, his voice was final. "From today, no one enters this room without my direct permission. No photographers, no tours, not even family. This room is sacred." Later that day, an internal memo made it official. Diana's room was sealed, access revoked, security upgraded. No explanation offered to the public. Tour guides were told to redirect questions. But among the staff who once walked those halls with her, there was relief. William had done what many feared no one would. He had taken back control, not just of a room, but of a story. Behind that locked door, Diana's memory would finally rest. Not just remembered, protected, a son's promise. After Diana's room was sealed, William slipped largely from the spotlight. He fulfilled engagements with a composed face, but behind the scenes his steps grew more deliberate, his tone firmer. Those closest to him could feel it. He was grieving again, not as a boy in public, but as a man quietly defending what he loved. One night, long after the palace had gone still and his children were asleep, William sat alone in his study. A fire crackled beside him, its warmth no comfort. On the table lay photographs of Diana, some formal, some candid, all personal. He picked up one of her holding baby George, a photo never released to the world. Her tender smile made his chest ache. The rage had passed. The fire, the confrontation, the excuses, all behind him now. What remained was resolve, a duty not as a prince, but as a son. He opened a leather-bound notebook and began to write. Not for press, not for history. A letter only he would ever read. In it, he promised to raise his children to know her, not just in stories, but in values. To guard her legacy, even if others tried to erase it. To let her kindness, her courage, her love echo in the way he ruled, served, and fathered. The letter ended with one simple line. "You were never just history. You are still my home." With those final words, William folded the letter and placed it inside a silver box, locking it with a small key he kept beneath his shirt. That box, holding both his words and the rescued relics from the fire, would rest in the royal vault, waiting for the day George, Charlotte, and Louis were old enough to understand. But his tribute didn't stop with sealed rooms or private letters. Quietly, William began laying the foundation for something greater. Behind the scenes, a new charitable initiative in Diana's name, focused on mental health and child advocacy, was already taking shape. No press release, no fanfare, not yet. It wasn't about competing with Camilla's public role. It was about reintroducing Diana's voice into the monarchy's future. William didn't need a campaign. He had memory, he had conviction, and most of all, he had time. As dawn painted the sky in soft pink, he stood at the window and finally allowed himself to breathe. The fire had stolen fragments, but it could not touch the whole. His mother's legacy would not be erased. Not under his watch, not in his lifetime. Because it wasn't the flames that left the deepest scar, it was what they tried to silence. Yet memory is stubborn, and legacy defies ash. What Camilla thought could be erased had instead been reignited. William's defiance, his sealing of Diana's room, his private vow, they were more than responses to betrayal. They were the declaration of a son, a guardian, and a future king. Some histories are too sacred to burn. Behind palace walls, loyalty whispered louder than power, and in that silence, one truth rang clear. Diana's light would never fade. Not from photos, not from her children, not from the hearts of those who lived her warmth. What do you think about this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.